If we can, visitors and committee members, thank you very much for coming today. Very excited to kick the year off with the Education Committee. Today is going to be an informative day, committee members. I wanted to bring some information for you to give to you. I hope this afternoon or this morning you got my welcome letter back. I think we did a lot of very good things last year. There seems to be a tremendous amount of energy inside the session right now for education, and I'm very proud of our members and what they're talking about and working together at what's best for our children in this state of Georgia. Some of the bills that we passed last year were set right along on the lines of what our goals were for this committee. And I want to begin today by reminding y'all of those goals as we are talking quite a bit in the chamber. We talked about safety being our first goal and how important it was for a student to feel secure in their environment that would enhance their learning and how important that was to us. Second was literacy and how important in this state it is at a very young age to be able to read and to be able to read on grade level. And then, of course, great policy, level number 3, bringing great policy to this committee as we change lives so often as we are working with those children in there. So keep in mind as we have discussions, as you discuss with me, you're going to get more attention from me if you are paying attention to safety, if you're paying attention to literacy, or if it's great policy. So I felt like we did a very good job of that last year and put out a lot of good opportunities for our children, for our teachers in the state. I not only saw it reflected in the governor's budget, but in House appropriations, what we're talking about for education in this state, as well as the discussions you are having with me in the chamber. Looking forward to, again, a great year for education here in this state. I'll tell you that what I'm seeing as I've spoken around the state to many educators is I'm very proud of the grit that I'm seeing in our teachers. I'm very proud of the grit that I'm seeing in our leadership that is directing the education. And so I think it's very important for you to see some of that grit today as we have brought Christy Todd here and asked her to speak to you, which I've already heard her speak. And not only is she a tremendous person, but she is a tremendous teacher. And it just so happens she knows I know her father well, and she comes from a family of educators there. But Ms. Todd is a fantastic representation for this state. I think we can learn a lot about what is happening in education through her and the communication with her. I think many of you know, or many of you might not know, that our Teacher of the Year, state of Georgia, gets to go around and communicate for 1 year, not in the classroom, goes around to the classrooms throughout the state and is allowed to do that. And she is a great representation for us. Some of you have told me you have heard her, but what I would like to do, Ms. Todd, if you would step on up here, let us recognize you, and if you would tell us about your background some.
Are you going to get me on? There we go. Thank you to Chairman Irwin and to the committee members for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my background experiences as an educator and how I think the House Education Committee can help teachers. So I grew up on a farm in Sonoy, Georgia. Yes, that's me riding a cow. Before there were zombies. So my hometown didn't have a red light when I was growing up, and now it is a international film tourism destination producing hit shows like The Walking Dead, Stranger Things, and movies from the Marvel Universe. And the school that I work at right down the road, we've gone through some changes too. I work at Rising Star Middle School in Fayette County Public Schools, and I facilitate our Community for Creativity initiative and teach music technology as a way to connect with our local booming creative industries sector that is just a few miles down the road. In addition, I run our school's recording label called Hall Pass Creates and help students create original content which we distribute across major streaming platforms. I come from a family, like Chairman Irwin said, of people who really value education. My mother is a retired high school health occupations teacher. My husband works with dual enrollment partnerships in the technical college system. And my father is the facilities director of Fayette County Schools. He builds schools. And when I was 12 years old, he took me to this job site and he said, "Christy, do you see that pile of dirt? That's going to be the auditorium. And over there where they're pouring concrete, that's the chorus room." And I've spent the last 15 years working in that very school that my dad built. But just like my dad, I'm a builder. But I build connections so my students can build their futures. And I believe in public school education because I think it is the single most powerful tool we have to create future economic prosperity across our state for millions of Georgia's families. But when we talk about building connections, let's get real for a minute and talk about what that actually means. You know, it's a feeling deep inside of you. Somebody sees you, your creative superpower. And as a teacher, that's the feeling I like to give my students every day. And now as Georgia Teacher of the Year, that's also the feeling I want to give my colleagues across this state. As Georgia Teacher of the Year, I've already had the opportunity to travel from the mountains of North Georgia to the cotton fields of the coastal plains to the live oaks on our barrier islands covered with Spanish moss. I visited rural, suburban, and urban schools. I've spoken to over 1,000 high school and college students, encouraging them to enter the teaching profession. And I've been a representative for the teacher voice at the State Board of Education. This unique, once-in-a-lifetime experience has given me a perspective on one of the biggest challenges facing education today, and it's closing the gap between policy and practice. Most of you here in this room spend your days hearing from your constituents and making policy to address their concerns. Teachers spend our time implementing those policies into practice. And as Georgia Teacher of the Year, my goal is in some small way to help minimize the gap between the two. One of the hot topics I hear everywhere I travel this year is that with Georgia being named the #1 state to do business 10 years in a row, there is a significant need to meet workforce demands. And I believe to do this, we must also make Georgia the #1 state for teachers to work. For Georgia to prosper economically, we must recruit and retain excellent teachers. But to do that, it's essential that we elevate the teaching profession so we are competitive in the job market. I'd like to personally thank the State Board of Education, Superintendent Woods, the Department of Education, Governor Kemp, and our friends under the Gold Dome on your recent work that is directly benefiting teachers. Much positive progress has been made on the ideas outlined for elevating the teaching workforce, as found in a roadmap to reimagining K-12 education, the Teacher Burnout Report, and the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education's 2023 Top 10 Issues to Watch. My colleagues across this state, we now benefit from a teacher pay raise of over $7,000 over the last 5 years, $2,000 in retention bonuses, free mental health counseling, financial and legal resources, paid educator parental leave, teacher tax credits, grants for teacher endorsements, and the option for retired teachers to return to work in full-time, high-needs areas. But even though progress has been made, we know that there is still more work to be done to recruit and retain a highly qualified education workforce. In speaking with teachers across the state about the demands of their schedule and job responsibilities, I believe that to make Georgia the #1 state for teachers to work, We should increase compensation, employment options, and career advancement opportunities for our workforce. We should connect wraparound services to students and staff, and we should fully fund our schools to support student achievement. I'd like to personally thank Governor Kemp for his education budget proposal that earmarks an additional $1.4 billion for public school education. This is the type of long-term investment that will reap dividends for Georgia's families and our state's economic future. And already, since the State of the State address, I have heard excitement from teachers, administrators, and community stakeholders on the positive impact that this investment will make. So I'm here today as a voice for my 123,210 colleagues across the great state of Georgia to ask the House Education Committee to support the governor's proposed increases for our public school education budget. Let's support our public schools by increasing funding for school safety. Students can't learn if they don't feel safe, and school resource officers provide so much more than just law enforcement and threat assessment. They are counselors and mentors to students who build relationships so schools can proactively minimize future risks. They help students understand our state's laws and paths that they can choose to become productive citizens. I am fortunate to work at a school with a school resource officer, and I feel that this position is fundamental to developing healthy and secure school buildings. Early learning. We know that the early years of a child's life are the most important for brain development. For children to grow, they need sensory-rich experiences that can build curiosity. But unfortunately, some of Georgia's children do not have access to early learning environment that can prepare them for success when they enter kindergarten. Prioritizing spending on early learning will set our students up for long-term academic success, in addition to providing an important piece of our state's childcare infrastructure. Literacy. I am thankful for our state's renewed focus on literacy, and this is a sentiment that I hear echoed by parents as well as teachers. Providing funding to implement the requirements outlined in House Bill 538 will allow the Georgia Department of Education to build the infrastructure necessary to support a cohesive statewide approach to teaching, screening, and interventions. I'd like to personally thank Representative Bethany Ballard for your work authoring this bill and your drive to make sure that every student in the state of Georgia can read. Thank you. Teacher supports and development. Georgia can be a leader in our region for compensating teachers, increasing the recruitment and retention of a highly qualified workforce. On behalf of teachers across our state who work multiple jobs, including myself, thank you for considering elevating the teaching profession by prioritizing a livable working wage for educators. Transportation. The need for additional transportation funding is a hot topic that I hear everywhere I travel. Due to rising costs, a superintendent told me that approximately 30% of her entire school system's budget was devoted to transportation, leaving little room for other district needs or local pay supplements. I also held a teacher's hand who broke down crying, upset that several of her migrant students dropped out of school because their district couldn't provide transportation to their work-based learning jobs. When counties don't have enough money for transportation, they have to cut corners in other areas to make ends meet. Now is the time to stop this heavy financial burden on our local districts who are mandated to follow state law to provide transportation. And poverty impact. Teachers consistently find themselves in need of funding, office supplies, classroom resources, professional development materials, musical instruments, athletic equipment, money for field trips, and items to cover basic student needs. Some schools rely on parent-teacher organizations to fundraise, to bridge the gap in what the school budget provides and what is needed to run a school. But for schools in high poverty areas, the ability for a parent organization to meet schools' needs is limited. This creates wide discrepancies in the resources at the disposal of public schools across our state. Many teachers feel pressure to individually fundraise to meet the needs of their classroom, from paying $20 to the front office to wear jeans, to selling cookie dough, to listing their classrooms on donorschoose.org. Teachers feel the burden of finding time during the school day not only to teach, but to fundraise for the supplies they need to do their job. This takes time away from planning, student interventions, and professional development. We must recognize poverty's impact on a school and the additional burden it places on family, teachers, students, and administrators. Georgia is only one of 6 states in the U.S. that doesn't recognize poverty in our funding formula. Just like our students have different needs, so do our communities. It is time to ensure that those needs are met. In conclusion, I think that reimagining the teaching job requires bold leadership and a willingness to challenge long-held assumptions about how people, time, and money are organized in our schools. And I believe sitting right here in front of me are those bold leaders who can take action to make that happen. Let's work together to make Georgia the #1 state for teachers to work and the #1 place for students to learn. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Todd. We are so blessed to have you and to service all of our children across Georgia. And thank you for that message. In doing a little cleanup right here, we're at a hard stop at 1 o'clock. So, or excuse me, 2 o'clock. We started 1. We missed that down there, didn't we, Chairman Duden? Y'all are good at keeping me straight. I don't mind saying that. I'll allow one question, and members will do one, but we're going to have to keep moving as we're already running behind for our other 2 speakers today. Number 22, Ms. Representative Maynard.
Thank you.
You're on.
Thank you.
Well,
It's me.
there you go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your service, and thank you to the 100,000 plus other colleagues that you have. Oftentimes, as parents, we understand that we are allowing our kids to go into a building, and you essentially are their parent during that time. And so, on behalf of parents, I want to just thank you. I want the Georgia to know that parents appreciate teachers. My question is, as you have traveled the state, I represent Atlanta Public Schools. It is my belief that how a child learns in downtown Atlanta, walking through crack-infested communities, is much different than walking down the street in a rural community. What have you seen that would help urban schools be more accountable to parents that feel like all of their needs are not being addressed?
I think that what I talked about today, I'm really looking at transportation and making sure that we fully fund our schools for transportation, because that will move money to other areas. I think also recognizing the impact of poverty is huge, to make sure that every school has the resources that they need to be able to work with our students. And then finally, I think the type of work that you guys are doing with House Bill 538, where we're talking about some statewide accountability and measures to put in place to make sure all of our children can read, is the right type of work to be doing to support students across our state, whether they're in rural, suburban, or urban districts.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give her a hand again. Thank you, Teacher of the Year. Let me clean up one other thing that I failed to do at the beginning and recognized here. If you would, Vice Chair, do you mind blessing this meeting for us, please?
Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the men and women in this room. This afternoon, we pray for the committee, the folks in this room, and all of those across the state, that you'd bless us with wisdom, justice, and moderation as we consider these important issues. But first and foremost, let's bless our teachers, our students, our administrators, and what they do, that we might be the best state in our nation for education. We pray these things in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you very much. Okay, next up, I believe, is early learning. And as many of you are aware, the speaker asked the House to study early learning. Ms. Pro Tem Jones chaired that, did a fabulous job, members of that, with some great recommendations. I think many of you have seen those recommendations were released publicly last week. But I felt it was very important for us to hear it. We heard it from the Teacher of the Year, how impactful early learning can be inside of a school and on those developing minds. So this was a very important study to this state. So Pro Tem Jones, do you mind presenting to us?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your comments. You did a great job. I hate having to follow you. So as the chairman said, the speaker appointed a committee, and just for y'all to know who was on it, was Representative Dubnik, Chairman Irwin, who I designated as the vice chair of the committee, Carl Gilliard, and Todd Jones. And we met a number of times. We listened to superintendents. We heard from the private providers, and we certainly worked with DeKalb and with House Budget. And then we had a variety of advocates speak to us as well. And I'll just get into what the recommendations were. They sort of fell into about 5 categories. The sum total, if we were to implement them all this year, and that's my goal, would cost about $100 million more a year. Almost all of that would come out of lottery. Only one piece of legislation is required, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the rest would be done budgetarily. And the first recommendation is to reduce the class size from 22 to 20. Back in 12, we went from 20 to 22 on the heels of the Great Recession. The lottery funds were on a path to be depleted because particularly during the Great Recession, more kids were staying and going to college. When you can't get a job, you go to college sometimes. And I think you're seeing the inverse of that now, where you have plentiful jobs. Some young adults are deciding maybe they don't need to go to college. They'd rather go straight to work. And so we're seeing a flattening of our higher education enrollment. So that's the first. And just to put it in perspective, most kindergarten classes have about 18 or 19 students. So 4-year-olds have a larger class size than do most kindergarten classes. I say most because almost virtually every school system has a contract, whether you call it a charter system or contract system, and so they get to actually determine their class sizes, but most try to keep it in that range of 18 to 19 students. The second category was increasing the salaries for the assistant teachers and the lead teachers. And what mattered to me was aligning the pay scale to our K through 12 pay scale, particularly with the teachers, so that future legislatures will keep that going forward. You know, nothing you do, you don't want it to just be a one-time thing and then next year they're being paid less. The same with assistant teachers. We took the average of paraprofessionals, which is their counterpart, say in kindergarten, and have suggested that assistant pre-K teachers be given the state average, which is roughly, let's see, right now they're paid $20,000, assistant teachers. And this would take them up to, I don't have it right here in front of me, but it was 25 something. Let me just mention, those salaries are before the governor's 4% pay increase for state employees or $2,500 for teachers. So these salaries that we're recommending, I recommend that the teacher salaries go up by $2,500 more than what you see in the report, and the assistant teachers would go up by 4% more than what you see. Because again, I think it's very important that it become the norm, that we benchmark it to what K through 12 teachers earn. I was here, I don't remember the year, when we require, unless you get a waiver, a pre-K teacher, lead teacher, to have a early childhood education degree. That did not used to be the case. I personally had mixed feelings about it because it's a smaller pool of potential teachers, but that's what we have, but yet we give them a larger class size and oftentimes less money. Now, the salaries that I'm recommending are without, obviously, what a local school system might offer with a supplement. So it's not like they still may make less than they would if they went and became a kindergarten teacher, because we don't have the property tax revenue to offer the supplement. Not all school systems offer a supplement, but many of them do. The next category was just general operating funds. Just to give you an example, if KinderCare down the street or Brantley County Schools decides to open an additional pre-K class, for example, Houston County opened another class this year, we provide an amount of money for them to furnish the classroom. If you look around, it's everything you see, including on the playground, and that number hasn't changed in 30 years. It's $8,000. So I asked DeKalb to come up with what would it cost. They talked to those that they serve in the private sector and in the public sector, the school systems and the child care facilities, and we were recommending $30,000. That's just for the inside the classroom. That doesn't pay for anything in terms of construction of the classroom. Transportation funds, we're recommending to increase the transportation funds to the average of what students receive statewide K through 12, which is about $80 per child per year. Pre-K providers, whether it's the elementary school or the child care facility, receives $16.50 per child per year, and only if you qualify for free or reduced lunch. So in essence, there's no transportation funds, and you have to retrofit school buses to accommodate the children, or the private providers have vans, and they may not be able to go pick up every child because some parents are bringing the children from far away, but they certainly could arrange transportation for children who are close by. And then the last area, in 30 years, we have not offered anything for capital construction. So you know, whether the house you live in, the apartment building you live in, or your business, somebody's got to pay for that classroom or that facility. And so to date, if it's a school system, they're subsidizing that classroom with their local property tax dollars. The harder one is if it's a private provider. I think in the past, clearly, they were borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. So they were paying for it out of their revenues of their other children that they cared for in daily child care. And as with the inflation so high, materials costing so much, labor, that's just not really possible anymore. And so we're going to see and have seen a leveling off of new classrooms. And to put this in perspective, I think it was around 2012, we had a high of 83,000 students enrolled in Georgia pre-K. Today, it's about 10,000 less. It's 73,000. But yet Georgia has grown 10% in that time period. So it's not just demographics. That's the easy thing for some folks to say, well, in 10 years' time, that many people didn't stop having babies in a growing state. It truly is, the costs have made it so that there are classrooms that are just not opening because they can't find a teacher. They certainly can't find an assistant teacher. or they can't afford to devote and construct a classroom. And so, so long story short, on the capital construction, I'm treating them differently. The public schools, Chairman Irwin is authoring a bill to allow pre-K classes to qualify for capital construction dollars in the state budget. And then, of course, they can supplement that with their local property tax dollars. That doesn't really work with the private providers, because a private provider, I don't know for certainty they're going to be there long term. You know, a government's going to be there. So I used the concept that I used with some charter schools, a lease equivalent. What would it cost to lease that classroom? What's the equivalent of leasing that classroom? And DeCal helped us come up with that number so that you're paying for the use of that classroom as it's being used. And I think this will make a tremendous difference long term. We have actually a very low wait list. But you can't just look at the wait list, because the wait list is for classes that there are. What you don't know is how many children would have attended for classrooms that never opened, where they never had a teacher. And we did look, and I'm actually having copies made for y'all. I think by the time your meeting ends, we'll have a copy of it for each one of you. I wanted to see kind of and you'll see in here sort of the spectrum of pre-K. It's very interesting to look at, because most of us think of it sort of the way it operates in the county we primarily represent, or the region. And what you'll see is there are school systems that essentially offer no pre-K, public pre-K, and there are regions of the state that essentially have no private pre-K. And personally, I think to the degree that it's feasible, you really want both, because they work for all different families. But certainly there are families that need the big yellow bus, and that absolutely need door-to-door transportation. And but there are also families that very much want to take their 4-year-old to the same facility where maybe their 2-year-old is staying for childcare, receives childcare services. And so for that mom or dad, it's better for them to drive to a private provider, and they like having both children together. They like to drive with the child. Maybe they like to have them near where they work. And so of the 73,000 students, about half are enrolled at a public pre-K, and about half are at a private for-profit provider. And it works well, but when you look at the saturation rate, the only thing I will mention to you, there's a map there, and so I asked, I guess it was DeCal, to assemble this information along with House budget. How many kindergartners were there per school system? And as you know, there are city school systems, so we had to take that into account as well. And about how many are enrolled in public pre-K. There are a few outliers that it will appear that there are more kids enrolled in pre-K than there are even kindergartners. That's not actually the case. You'll notice they're it'll be like 103%. Those are primarily very small, primarily poor, low-density counties where maybe there were only 26 kindergartners, and which mean prospective kindergartners next year. This year it's only a year different, but to try and serve that community that was not going to have a private pre-K provider in that low-density area, we went ahead and funded 2 classrooms, because pre-K is funded by class, not by student, like we're accustomed to with K through 12 FTE. So DeCal wants to make sure that those children have an opportunity, because there won't be some church preschool or some private preschool. But some really do stand out. I mean, like, Gwinnett generally just does not offer public pre-K. And I think they have 2 classes, maybe in their some special facilities or special schools, one of the largest school systems in the country, certainly the largest in Georgia. And then we have some like Cherokee, large school system, that offers 10 classrooms. They offer 0 supplement to their pre-K teachers, and the pre-K students are not eligible to stay after school. Well, if you're a working parent, that doesn't really work for you too well. If you got a kindergarten or a pre-K student and somebody, I don't know what they're going to do with, probably that kid's just not going to go to pre-K is what it means. And at least not in the public schools. And then we have just an example, Houston County. About half the population of Cherokee has 49 public pre-K classrooms. They offer 100% of the local supplement that they offer to K through 12. They make no distinction. And every one of those students are eligible to stay after school. So there's still work to be done. Hopefully this will help. We are seeing a leveling off in general, even though we're a growing state, of K through 12 age children enrolled. So I'm hoping that these changes will encourage public schools to offer more classes. School systems have the highest revenues per student in the history of Georgia. Highest reserves. Georgia has the highest budget. I'm not just picking on them. And so I do feel like the time is ripe to make some fundamental changes going forward in how we fund it and how we view it, because it's not just an education issue, it's a workforce development. There are many parents that will not re-enter the workforce until their children have a full-time enriched educational environment like pre-K. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that you will have, you have copies in front of you, and you can certainly find me on the floor if you have additional questions.
Ms. Pro Tem, first of all, great topic and great job with the committee in guiding us through to these recommendations that I think will be impactful for the state for decades forward. So a well-spent $100 million in this state. I think investing in our youngest. Let me point out to the committee members that you got every odd page number here. The even pages, the whole report will come to you electronically. We'll send it to you, but you have the odd pages here. So if you're reading half the recommendation,
So they've got every other page?
we'll
We'll get you the full report. I'll have them delivered to your office today.
and
That's what happens when you're doing.
Representative Evans, do you have one question so we can stay on? What's your number down there? 2.
I just have a
Gotcha.
quick question as far as the funding for this. First of all, of course, I'm very excited about this, so thank you so much for your work. So if it comes out of pre-K, what is the authorization like that's different from coming out of General Assembly?
So the monies would come out of the lottery revenues. We have about a $1.5 billion reserve on top of the required reserve for the lottery. So the money is certainly there. We'll have to, going through the budget process, have to work on getting those funds recognized both through the governor's office and through House budget. But the money's certainly record high revenue and reserves. And as you know, lottery can only be used for Hope Scholarship, Hope Grant, and pre-K. And last year, we fully funded, through the governor's initiative, the tuition reimbursement for Hope Grant and Hope Scholarship. So it's not coming out of that. That huge reserve that we have is after everyone's gotten 100%. And if you remember the year before that, the governor's initiative was that we got rid of the hangover from the Great Recession institution fee, which was just a nice, euphemism for more tuition that didn't come out of Hope, or didn't come out of lottery. So, but other than that one piece of legislation to allow pre-K classrooms to qualify for capital construction funds in the budget, all of this would come out of lottery funds.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Pro Tem. And for time purposes, we've just about Dr. Rickman got back on schedule here, just about. So please remember, we've got a 2 o'clock hard stop for the next committee. Let's go to Dr. Rickman, which is the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. As we all know, we see it in the session every year as this organization does a very good job of many things, but studying the top 10 issues in education. So Dr. Rickman, with that, if you can get pulled up there, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try and talk and navigate as I do this. Where's my mouse? There we go. Perfect.
That screen seems to have cut off. I believe you have a
Yep.
copy of these as she is doing that right in front of you.
Yes.
So an opportunity to look at that. As you know, to our peers, we will pass these out soon there in the chamber so you can discuss with our peers in the chamber.
Thank you so much, Chairman Irwin, and for the committee for inviting us to present today. And I also want to give a huge thank out to Christy and Representative Jones that their comments and what they're trying to put forward is fully in line with what I'm going to say as well. And I think the more voices we have echoing these, the better. And that I'm just really excited to be in education in Georgia at this time. Again, thank you. I'm Dana Rickman. I'm the president of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, and I wanted very, very briefly just give you a quick preview into our top 10 issues to watch in 2024. There's a packet at your table that has this. This is it. And a few other things about our work and the research that we do. Christy mentioned the link between practice and policy, and I think that's the space where the Georgia Partnership works as well. And so as you all navigate that space, that gap, look to us as a resource to help you think about the issues. As many of you know, that the Georgia Partnership is a nonpartisan research policy think tank. And so we don't have an ideological agenda. My ideology is data in research, and I'm very committed to it. Also, thank you, shout out to Christy, who talked about our 2023 top 10. Today we're talking about 2024. And so I want to dive right in, but just a little bit of a background. Again, each of these issues, research-based, nonpartisan analysis of critical issues that we feel greatly impact our public education and relatedly the workforce pipeline, and how we think about making sure that all students in Georgia, whether early learning, tiny babies, all the way through adults who are reskilling for that next job as job changes are trending, how are they all prepared to actively engage in a healthy economic cycle and contribute to Georgia's growing economy? And so these issues, they're not in any particular priority order, but they are in a sort of particular order that I'll explain. So these are the 10, and for everybody's sanity and time, I'm not going to go into all 10 in any kind of detail, but I do just want to give you a couple of highlights, and then if there's time for a question. The first issue it's the first time that we've put this down on paper, frankly, and tried to be a little bold about it. The first issue identifies 2 real barriers that we feel have really stymied some community-driven solutions and also state-level solutions to some of our most vexing problems around education, and that's divisive rhetoric and political polarization. And so we think that this is a real time and there's a real opportunity now to help local leaders and state leaders really shift mindsets by empowering folks to come together around a shared vision of what is working for education, what can work for education, and be a lot more sort of goal-oriented around what we agree on. I think that it'd be a lot more productive use of everybody's time. Issues 2 through 4, and this is where I talk about they're not in a particular order, but not a priority, but a particular order. 2 through 4 are topics that have received extensive attention from state legislators and agency leaders. And so we talked about literacy. We get into the current state of literacy in Georgia, student mental health, and access to quality child care. Representative Jones mentioned that, a lot of parents don't re-enter the workforce. Childcare is a huge barrier to workforce participation, and so that issue really dives into that a little bit. Issues 5, 6, and 7 are clustered together. They're what we call sort of people-centered investments. Issue 5 career pathways and really thinking about how we align career pathways in K-12 and post-secondary to community workforce needs. It's like how do you grow your own workforce within your community? This is particularly relevant to rural Georgia where you have maybe one or two major industries. Do you have the right pathways within your schools to really feed that? Issue 6 really looks at an alternative way for educator recruitment in that induction process for new teachers to really help get at that recruitment retention issue that Georgia has. And issue 7, the superintendent struggle, this one is one, every year we try to pick at least one or two issues that we feel are incredibly important and very relevant but are not getting the attention that we feel it deserves. And since 2019, we've had at least a 50% turnover in school superintendents at the local level. Some districts have seen more than 1 or 2 turnovers since then. And I think if all of you know, if you're trying to lead a corporation, if you're trying to do something new, you can't get any traction on what you're trying to do if you have leadership changes all the time. There's a real crisis in supporting and helping our superintendents right now, and I think we need a real dedicated focus on how we train and retain our leaders at the district level. Finally, the last 3 relate to really navigating an uncertain future and really think about how do we ensure the state's education and workforce systems are more agile and resilient. Knock on wood, we don't have any more pandemics, but there's always going to be some economic crisis. I mean, the economy is changing fast and that's not going to slow down. And so how do we sort of either recession-proof or, keep our systems resilient? One is the funding cliff that we all know is coming. The federal funds run out this September, and so that's most local districts are going to take approximately a 10% hit to their budget. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do we help them make good choices around that, and what can we do to support? Corporate connections. The business industry is re-engaging like never before in terms of getting a skilled workforce together, and there's really been a paradigm shift on delivering post-secondary education to our future workforce. And so it's really interesting what's going on now, and there's some great opportunities there. And finally, the last issue, 1.25 million more credentials. As many of you who are familiar with our work know that we have the EdQuest state policy plan, the EdQuest framework, which is a 10-year policy framework that would hopefully get us to 65% of our adult workforce in the next 10 years will have a post-secondary credential of value. That's absolutely necessary for Georgia's continued economic growth. To get us to that 65%, we need 1.25 million more people credentialed, either those coming through the K-12 system, but more importantly, those who are not in the K-12 system are adults who are out there. We have many adults that need reskilling, upskilling, skilling of any level. And so some strategies there about how we can reach that North Star goal so that we can remain one of the best, the best state to do business, and then hopefully soon the best state for teachers as well. That's my spiel. All of our contact information is in the folders, and I know we're about out of time and you got appropriations to get to. And so the primary author, Matt Smith, is here with me today. We're happy to take any questions now or later. Thank you.
Dr. Rickman, you definitely get the gold star for the day for the quickest presentation.
Right.
So thank you for that. And members, we do have time for a question here, and we've got them. And Chairman Dubnik, I know appropriations, since you're chair of that, you've got to run pretty quick. Is that your number flashing right down there? Okay. Representative Wade, is that 14?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Great presentation. I just want to know how much influence did you have on number 7 being in the top 10 as a retired superintendent? I thought that was was that the Irwin Amendment?
You heard about my grit now. I'm proud of the grit that we got, and we need to hang on to it for the leaders. So good question. We'll entertain a real question on this end over here. Who is number 10? Chairman Jones.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. You talked about data being your guiding light, so I'm going to request something if you don't mind. Sure. So it's not a question, but a request. We've been grappling with the funding cliff ourselves, especially as we've seen money rain down from D.C. However, we haven't been able to get a true, where the rubber meets the road, I'll say, utilization of those funds within each of the districts, especially in the following way. And if you have any data, we would appreciate it. Was there, at the individual level, assessments done of the child? What plan was done once we understood the gaps? And then were there assessments done so that we can understand were those gaps addressed, or how much gap, in a sense, still exists based on what people typically call, the learning loss that occurred during COVID? We would appreciate that, I think, from a policy standpoint, and then also from an appropriation standpoint. And that type of data would go really far in terms of informing us. So anything you could do to help us, we sure would appreciate.
I have a quick answer.
Yes.
Just real briefly, as far as I know, and I've got friends from DOE here that can counteract me, there's no state level uniform assessment that has been done. Some districts in their planning, there have some that have really dug into this, others not so much. A lot of it has to do with capacity. And so it depends on the question of the assessments done just overall, how were they before and now, versus a question around the effectiveness of the different interventions that have been used over the past 3-4 years. And some, yes, and that's actually another, we have funding from the Georgia Department of Education, the CARES Impact Study, that will be reporting out on that shortly.
So, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go right.
Just as a quick follow-up, yeah, so we've seen the 3rd grade, the 8th grade in terms of,
Right.
I'll say, the challenges that we've had during the pandemic. I'm sorry? Yeah, oh, well, thank you, Representative Evans.
As part of our CARES Impact Study,
the-
we're doing some case studies, and so
Right.
within the next 6 to 8 months, we'll be able to raise up some bright spots about districts that did really well with this, to try and share some of those learnings.
So what my real interest is, notwithstanding the 3rd and 8th grade scores, which
Yeah.
I think we're all aware of, really is at the granular level, especially just to truly understand, was the money moved against, in a sense, the learning loss? And specifically what was addressed, how was it addressed, and how was it assessed? And again, I'm not suggesting the assessment needed to be a nationally standardized test, but rather I am sure there are assessment tools that our 180 school districts have that could determine whether or not a 6th grader is coming back to, in a sense, grade level. Are they still lagging from the COVID pandemic?
A lot of local districts will have that, and we can get into that for you.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to entertain one question, and we need to try to get it done, Representative Maynard, in a minute if we can.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at your framework here, and one of the things that you mentioned is building capacity. Since every school district is so different, so I'm going to just talk about my district in particular. When you have leaders that are elected to school boards from impoverished, blighted communities, their capacity may not be the capacity of a higher socioeconomic area in, say, Cherokee or Forsyth County. So they're able to bring more skill set to the school board. And when you're talking about dealing with a $1.5 billion budget, when you're looking at these big bets for capacity building, do you have any suggestions for school districts where the local school board members may not have the capacity to fully engage the best way that they can with the budget they have?
I'm happy to talk more after the meeting about this, but at first I would direct them to the GSBA, the Georgia School Boards Association. They have a bunch of great trainings and supports and can really help shore up the capacity of all boards, particularly ones that don't come with the natural knowledge of what they're doing. So that would be my first suggestion, and then when we have time, we can talk more after when there's time.
Fantastic. First of all, let us recognize Dr. Rickman and her group for what they do for the state and the information they provide. Thank you, Dr. Rickman. Appreciate your time today. Committee members, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for your questions and thoughts. Looking forward to a very prosperous year in education in this committee, and know that we passed our rules, we passed our structure at the beginning of the biennial. They have not changed. We have the two same subcommittees. Will function the same with those. Vice Chair Helton and Representative Ballard will chair those two committees. So be ready to listen up. We've already been meeting. We're preparing to start hearing some of your bills and seeing what we can get moving to make Georgia a better place for our young kids. Visitors, thank you for being here. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting.